The desert was silent, except for the sigh of sand against the wind. Under a pale moon, a caravan wound its way through an ocean of dunes, hundreds of camels carrying silk, spices, and stories. Their footsteps left brief impressions on the earth before the wind erased them, as if history itself was too shy to leave a trace. This was no ordinary path. It was a lifeline, a whisper between civilizations, a network of invisible threads that bound together the great empires of East and West, long before maps could define them. They called it the Silk Road, but it carried far more than silk. It carried dreams. Perfumes from Arabia gold, from Rome jade, from China. But also songs, prayers, philosophies, and ideas that would change the course of the human mind. This was a road where strangers met, languages collided, and faiths intertwined, a place where a merchant could trade silk for silver, or perhaps a single idea for immortality. Tonight, we'll travel this long road together, from the misty gardens of Xi'an to the shining ports of the Mediterranean. We'll walk through deserts that swallowed armies, mountains that touched the heavens, and cities that glittered like lanterns in the dark. You may close your eyes if you wish. Let the night carry you back 2,000 years, to an age when the world was both vast and connected, silent and alive. This is the story of the Silk Road, the ancient highway of dreams. Welcome to History for Sleep, where the past drifts softly into dreams. Do not forget to write out in the comments where you are listening from. I'd love to know in which places around the world I am helping people sleep even more soundly. Plus, if you like what I do here, subscribe now and let tomorrow's dream begin where this one ends. Chapter 1. The Birth of the Silk Road. Long before the name Silk Road existed, before the great caravans and the echoes of camel bells, there were trails, simple footpaths carved by nomads, traders, and wanderers who moved with the rhythm of the land. It began in China around the 2nd century B.C.E. The Han dynasty had united the empire, and the emperor, Wu of Han, hungered for knowledge of the mysterious lands beyond his borders. He sent an envoy, Zhang Qian, a quiet, determined man, to venture westward through the unknown. Captured by nomads, imprisoned for years, he escaped, crossed deserts and mountains, and finally reached the distant valleys of Fergana, where horses ran like the wind. When he returned, his hair had turned gray from the journey, but his eyes burned with revelation. He brought back not just stories, but seeds, literally and metaphorically, alfalfa, grapes, and ideas. And from that moment, China opened itself to the world. Caravans began to form, loaded with rolls of shimmering silk, a fabric so precious that in Rome it was worth its weight in gold. The Romans never knew how it was made. They imagined it grew from the trees of the East, spun by worms from heaven. But silk was only the beginning. Soon, jade, porcelain, and paper joined the trade. From the West came glass, wool, and spices. Along these routes, language, religion, and art flowed freely, invisible treasures worth more than gold. Yet the road was never safe. It was a world of deserts so vast they seemed eternal. The Taklamakan, the desert of death, where the wind whispered through the bones of those who never made it across. Still, the merchants came, one caravan after another, because beyond the horizon lay fortune and perhaps a little immortality. Thus was born the great artery of the ancient world, not from conquest, but from curiosity, courage, and the endless human desire to connect. Chapter 2. Caravans Through the Sands. Imagine the early morning light spilling over a sea of dunes. Camels sway like ships in slow rhythm, their bells ringing softly, their breath clouding in the chill dawn. Each caravan was a world unto itself. 100 travelers bound together by necessity, Chinese silk traders, Persian jewelers, Indian monks, Roman merchants, men who spoke in gestures more than words, but shared the same language of trade and survival. The road demanded silence, patience, and respect. A single sandstorm could erase an entire expedition. Bandits waited in shadowed passes. The desert gave no second chances, but there was beauty in the danger. At night, the stars stretched endlessly above, the same stars that guided every wanderer in history. Around small campfires, stories were traded as freely as goods. A tale from the east could become a legend in the west before morning. They told of dragons that guarded mountains, of spirits in the dunes, of gods who watched over travelers. Sometimes these tales carried fragments of truth or wisdom disguised as myth. In the oases of Dunhuang and Khotan, life bloomed like miracles. There were wells, palm trees, and markets glowing with color. A weary merchant could taste fresh fruit, wash the dust from his face, and listen to the chanting of monks in distant temples. Trade was never just business here. It was communion. Every meeting along the road was an exchange of worlds, silk for spice, prayer for story, memory for dream. By the time the caravan reached Samarkand, Bukhara, or Merv, the air was filled with the perfume of countless cultures mingling. Chinese paper money beside Roman coins, Persian carpets beneath Greek statues, Buddhist scrolls sharing shelves with Zoroastrian texts. The Silk Road was more than commerce. It was a great conversation, one that carried on for centuries. And though most travelers would never see the end of the road, each step they took helped weave the first global fabric of humanity. Chapter 3: The Cities of Central Asia. By the time a caravan reached the heart of Central Asia, the landscape had already shifted a dozen times, from dunes to mountains, from silence to song. And then, like a mirage that came true, the first city appeared on the horizon, Samarkand. For centuries, Samarkand was more than a dot on a map. It was a dream. Merchants called it the jewel of the desert. Travelers whispered its name like a prayer. Its walls shimmered with turquoise tiles, its air heavy with the perfume of saffron and pomegranate. The city never slept. By day, markets swelled with color. By night, oil lamps cast golden halos on the domes. Here, East met West not with swords, but with silk, laughter, and curiosity. In its narrow lanes, a Chinese trader might haggle with a Persian jeweler. A Roman doctor might study herbs brought by Indian monks. Languages melted into one another. Chinese, Sogdian, Persian, Greek, like notes in a single melody. Farther west lay Bukhara, where learning and faith flourished side by side. Its libraries overflowed with scrolls. Its scholars debated the stars. Pilgrims stopped to rest and to listen, carrying with them not just spices and wool, but the wisdom of books. Beyond Bukhara, the city of Merv gleamed in the desert heat. 1,000 wells and 1,000 gardens. Travelers said that in Merv you could taste every flavor of the known world in a single market. Honey from the Caucasus, silk from the East, dates from Arabia, and glass from Rome. In every one of these cities, hospitality was sacred. A stranger was a gift, not a burden. To feed a traveler was to please the gods. And so, the Silk Road became more than a route for goods. It became a chain of trust, linking countless hearts across the continent. At sunset, the city gates closed. From its rooftops rose the murmurs of prayer, the chiming of bells, the faint music of flutes. Even then, trade did not cease. In the glow of lanterns, quiet hands exchanged silk for spice, word for promise, idea for faith. Samarkand, Bukhara, Merv. Their names still echo through the centuries, bright as constellations across the desert sky. Chapter 4. The Journey to China. For most merchants, China was the beginning of the road. For others, it was the horizon they might never reach. To reach Chang'an, today's Xi'an, meant crossing mountains that seemed to scrape the stars and deserts that devoured the unwary. But those who reached it found a city unlike any other. Chang'an was the heart of the Han Empire, a metropolis of straight avenues, vast markets, and ornate palaces. At its gates, drums marked the hours. Within its walls, everything known to the world could be found. Silk was born here. In quiet mulberry groves, women tended the secret life of silk, feeding silkworms, unwinding their cocoons, and spinning the threads that emperors would treasure like light itself. For centuries, this craft was guarded more fiercely than any weapon. Revealing its secret was punishable by death. Yet somehow, the secret traveled, perhaps through a whisper, perhaps through a daring monk carrying silkworm eggs hidden in a cane, and soon, silk reached the west, shimmering like captured sunlight. But China offered more than silk. Its inventors shaped the world in ways the West could not yet imagine. Paper, porcelain, gunpowder, and the compass, each an invisible thread that would one day tie continents together. At the city's great market, the Western market, 1,000 languages mingled. There were camels from Persia, horses from Fergana, jade from Khotan, and scrolls from India. The emperor's guards watched, but rarely interfered, for the wealth of the empire flowed through those crowded stalls like a river of gold. At night, the gates of Chang'an glowed with lanterns. Poets wandered its gardens, composing verses about faraway lands they had never seen. Monks traced the stars and spoke of the mysteries of the soul. And on the easternmost edge of the world, the Silk Road ended, or perhaps began again. For every journey that reached China, another began in the opposite direction, carrying dreams westward. The road was not one path but many, a network of lifelines, constantly shifting, always alive. And though empires rose and fell, the Silk Road endured, whispering softly across the centuries like wind through silk. Chapter 5. The Spread of Ideas and Religions. The Silk Road carried silk and spice, yes, but it also carried faith, invisible and weightless. Belief traveled faster than any caravan could. From the east came Buddhism, gentle as water. Monks left the temples of India and followed the desert winds toward China. They carried nothing but their robes, their chants, and a handful of scriptures. At every oasis they stopped to share a teaching, to carve a statue, to build a shrine. In Dunhuang, the caves became a library of devotion, hundreds of temples cut into the rock, their walls painted with colors that have outlasted 1,000 storms. Each painting told the same quiet truth, that peace is found not in gold or conquest, but within. From the west came Christianity, carried not by kings, but by merchants and missionaries who crossed mountains with crosses hidden in their packs. They found homes in the markets of Persia, in the hills of Armenia, and deep within the sands where empires rarely reached. And then came Islam, flowing eastward like sunrise. Traders from Arabia brought with them a faith built on mercy and unity. Mosques rose beside monasteries, calligraphy blossomed beside murals, and the muezzin's song joined the chorus of bells. Along the Silk Road, faith did not always divide, it often intertwined. A single street in Bukhara might hold a Buddhist stupa, a Christian chapel, and a mosque facing Mecca, each humming with prayer. People listened, debated, borrowed words from one another, and found shared meaning in the mystery of existence. Ideas moved like wind, unseen, unstoppable. And by the time the caravans reached the sea, they carried more than silk. They carried philosophies, scriptures, and languages, gifts of the spirit wrapped in dust and devotion. The Silk Road became not just a trade route, but a spiritual highway, weaving the unseen threads of belief into the fabric of humanity. Chapter 6: Merchants, Monks, and Explorers. If the Silk Road had a heartbeat, it was the people who dared to walk it. They were not always heroes. Some were dreamers, some outcasts, some simply restless souls searching for something they could not name. There were merchants, hardened by sand and sun, who knew the value of both jade and trust. They kept careful ledgers, but often gambled everything on the promise of a single journey. To survive, they learned the languages of kindness, a shared meal, a bowed head, an honest weight on the scale. There were monks, traveling barefoot through lands of fire and frost. Some carried scrolls of philosophy, others carried silence. They brought compassion where there was greed, patience where there was fear. Their presence turned caravan camps into classrooms, their stories into bridges between worlds. And there were explorers, wanderers who went farther than anyone had before. Men like Marco Polo, who followed the Silk Road to the court of Kublai Khan and returned with tales that Europe could barely believe. He wrote of black stones that burned like wood, of paper money that held the power of gold, of cities larger than any in Christendom. But long before Marco, there were nameless travelers, Persian sailors who mapped the monsoon winds, Chinese generals who traced lost kingdoms, Arab geographers who measured the curvature of the earth by stars alone. Each journey added a line to the story of humanity. Each footprint, though erased by sand, left an idea that endured. And still, through the centuries, one thing remained constant: the pull of the horizon, that quiet invitation whispered by every road. For the merchants, it promised fortune. For the monks, enlightenment. For the explorers, understanding. And for us, now listening centuries later, it offers a reminder that the world has always been connected by curiosity and courage. As the wind passes through the empty corridors of old cities, one can almost hear their voices, merchants bargaining, monks chanting, explorers describing the unseen. Their echoes fade, but their dreams remain, still traveling the ancient highway of time. Chapter 7: The Dangers of the Journey. The Silk Road was a dream, but it was also a trial. For every caravan that reached its destination, another vanished into silence. Between the mountains of Pamir and the sands of Taklamakan, death often walked beside the living. The desert was an ocean without mercy. It offered no water, no shade, and no forgiveness. Travelers tied ropes between their camels so they would not lose each other in sandstorms that turned day to night. When the wind rose, it carried with it the breath of the dead, dry, thin, and ancient. The Taklamakan had a name that travelers spoke only in whispers. You go in, but you do not come out. Those who survived told stories of entire caravans swallowed by dunes, of skeletons still clutching silk that would never be sold. Some claimed to hear bells ringing at night, the ghosts of lost travelers wandering eternally beneath the stars. But the desert was not the only danger. In the high mountains, snow and ice ruled. The Tian Shan range glittered like a crown of glass, beautiful, deadly. Avalanches crushed paths in seconds, and thin air stole breath like a thief. In the valleys below, bandits waited. They knew the merchants carried treasure too precious to ignore. Gold, jade, and silk changed hands through both trade and blood. Even emperors could not tame the road. Armies marched, built fortresses, and claimed victory, only for the sand to swallow their walls. The Silk Road belonged to no one. It was a wild vein through the world, alive, unpredictable, untamable. And yet, people came, because beyond the danger, there was always wonder. Every peril hid a promise. For some, it was fortune. For others, meaning. And for a few, simply the joy of being part of something greater than themselves, a network that connected humanity across the very edges of the earth. When the storms cleared, the silence that followed was breathtaking, vast, eternal, and humbling. In that silence, one could almost feel time itself breathing. Chapter 8: Marco Polo and the Westward Path. Centuries passed, and still the Silk Road thrived, until one Venetian youth changed the way the West would dream of the East forever. His name was Marco Polo. When Marco first saw the shores of the Black Sea, he was barely 17. He traveled with his father and uncle, merchants who had once met the Mongol Emperor Kublai Khan, grandson of Genghis. Their destination was beyond imagination: China, the great Khan's court at Chengdu. The journey took 3.5 years. They crossed the Persian deserts, the Pamir Mountains, and the endless Gobi. Every day was a test of endurance, every night a new constellation of stories. When they finally arrived at the Khan's palace, Marco was dazzled. He saw pavilions roofed with gold, lakes filled with swans, halls of marble and incense. Kublai welcomed him with curiosity and honor. In that court of infinite splendor, Marco Polo became not a guest, but a chronicler of worlds. He observed everything: the black stones that burned like wood, coal, the paper notes that carried the value of gold, money before Europe could dream of such a thing, the roads, the canals, the bridges, the cities, all woven together by the same invisible thread that once carried the caravans of silk. When he returned to Venice after 24 years, no one believed him. They called his tales exaggerations, fantasies spun by too much sun and sand. But centuries later, his book, The Travels of Marco Polo, became a window through which Europe first saw Asia not as myth, but as reality. Through his words, kings imagined new routes, sailors dreamed of reaching Cathay by sea, and map-makers redrew the world. He had not only walked the Silk Road, he had preserved it in memory, giving its dust the immortality of ink. Even as the old routes began to fade, Marco's stories kept them alive, reminding us that curiosity is the most powerful compass a human can carry. And though centuries have buried the caravan trails, his voice still travels. In the hush of the desert wind, one can still hear it, soft, persistent, filled with wonder, the voice of a boy from Venice who followed the ancient highway of dreams. Chapter 9: The Decline of the Silk Road. Nothing in the world endures forever. Not empires, not kings, not even the roads that once united them. By the 14th century, the Silk Road was beginning to fade, not with a crash, but with a sigh. The Mongol Empire, which had once kept the road safe under one banner, began to fracture. War and plague swept across continents like shadows moving with the wind. Caravans that had once carried silks and spices now carried news of sorrow, of cities emptied, of ports abandoned, of travelers who never returned. The Black Death crept along the same routes that had once carried enlightenment and gold. In the markets of Tabriz, Samarkand, and Venice, people spoke of invisible ghosts that passed from caravan to caravan. Trade slowed, and the rhythm of the world grew quiet. And then came a new rival, the sea. European explorers set their sails toward the horizon, seeking faster ways to reach the riches of the East. Ships began to replace camels, and the winds of the ocean carried what the desert once did. The Silk Road did not die suddenly. It simply became quieter, step by step, until its pulse slowed to a whisper. The caravanserais emptied, their courtyards filled with drifting sand. The oases dried, the cities fell into ruin, and the maps of the world redrew themselves around the sea instead of the sand. But even in silence, the road lived on. A merchant's ledger in Venice still bore the ink of Persian spice. A Buddhist scroll in China carried ink made from the soot of Roman lamps. And in the languages of the world, in every borrowed word, every idea shared across cultures, the Silk Road continued, unseen but eternal. History often fades, but it rarely disappears. Like the ghostly trails left by stars after they burned out, the Silk Road's light still lingers, faint but endless. Chapter 10: The Legacy of the Silk Road. Centuries have passed, and yet, the Silk Road has never truly gone. It lives in the ways we think, speak, trade, and dream. Every time we send a message across the world, every shipment, every exchange of art or music or story, we echo those first caravans, carrying silk and hope through the dust. Modern highways, airplanes, and fiber optic cables follow the same invisible routes that the camels once traced. China still calls its great global project the New Silk Road, a name chosen not from nostalgia but from memory. Because deep down, humanity still craves connection. The road taught us that difference is not a barrier. It's an invitation. That trade is not only the exchange of goods, but of imagination, and that even when kingdoms fall and deserts shift, the human desire to reach out, to understand, to listen, to share, endures. If you were to stand tonight in the ruins of Samarkand, you would still feel it. The stones are silent, but the air hums faintly, as if remembering every voice that ever passed through. A whisper from a Chinese monk, a song from a Persian merchant, the laughter of a Roman traveler seeing the sunrise beyond the mountains. All of them gone, and yet somehow still here. The Silk Road was not a single road. It was humanity's first internet, a web of lives, ideas, and dreams that stretched from one end of the world to the other. And though the sand has reclaimed its paths, the spirit of it moves through us still, connecting us quietly, like silk threads beneath the skin of history. So when the night grows quiet and you close your eyes, listen closely. You might still hear it, the faint echo of camel bells fading into the wind. The ancient highway of dreams still alive, still traveling. Part 2: Threads of Civilization. How the Silk Road changed the world. The Silk Road was never a single path. It was a living web, a heartbeat stretching from the Pacific to the Mediterranean. And every empire, every kingdom it touched, drew life from its pulse. For some, it was a road of gold and trade. For others, it was a bridge of knowledge and faith. For all, it was proof that even in an age of isolation, humanity's instinct was to connect, to send ideas as easily as silk, to receive inspiration as naturally as wind. Next, we will walk that web region by region. From the eastern edge of China to the distant shores of Rome, we'll see how each corner of the world found its rhythm in the music of exchange. The Silk Road did not just move goods. It reshaped civilizations. Chapter 1: China, the Weaver of Worlds. In the beginning, the Silk Road was China's whisper to the world. The Han emperors guarded their silkworms like living treasure. To the outside world, silk was a miracle, a river of light spun from air. In the mulberry groves of the East, families tended to their worms with devotion. They boiled cocoons, drew out the threads, and wove them into cloth so soft and radiant that foreign rulers believed it was the fabric of immortality itself. But silk was only one part of China's gift. Through the Silk Road, paper made its journey west, an invention that would change thought forever. Before paper, Ideas were heavy, trapped in clay, carved in stone, or written on costly parchment. But now they could fly. Folded, copied, shared. Chinese craftsmen also sent porcelain, tea, lacquerware, and compass technology across the world. In return came horses from Fergana, powerful, wild, unmatched, and stones of jade so pure they seemed to glow from within. China gained more than material wealth. Through Buddhism, arriving from India, it found spiritual depth. Through foreign merchants, it learned new art, new music, new tastes. Through trade itself, it found proof that its greatness could travel without armies. Chang'an, the capital, became the world's first true cosmopolitan city. Persian dancers performed in its courts. Arab astronomers mapped its stars. Indian monks translated sacred texts in its temples. The Middle Kingdom had reached outward, and in doing so, it became not just the origin of the Silk Road, but its beating heart. Chapter 2: Central Asia, the crossroads of the earth. If China was the heart, Central Asia was the spine, the place where everything met, merged, and transformed. Stretching from the Pamir Mountains to the Caspian Sea, the lands of Sogdia, Bactria, and Transoxiana were home to the world's first global middlemen, the Sogdians. They were merchants, linguists, and diplomats. They spoke the languages of all who passed, Persian, Chinese, Greek, Sanskrit, and could bargain in every one. To the Chinese they were envoys of the West, to the Persians traders of the East, to the Indians wanderers between worlds. The Sogdians built the trade cities that defined the Silk Road, Samarkand, Bukhara, Merv. They made their fortunes not by conquering, but by connecting. A Sogdian caravan might leave Xi'an with bolts of silk and return years later with gems, manuscripts, and gold. These cities became the jewels of the desert, markets alive with every scent and sound the world could offer. The call to prayer mixed with the chant of monks, the clang of coins with the whisper of prayer wheels. Central Asia's power lay not in armies, but in exchange. Knowledge, art, and belief passed through its gates like wind through open doors. The first translations of Buddhist texts into Chinese were made here. Persian astronomy met Greek philosophy beneath its stars, and even after empires crumbled, the spirit of connection survived. The roads through Samarkand remained open long after kings had fallen, because the desire to trade, to share, to know, was stronger than the desire to rule. The people of Central Asia were never just travelers. They were the keepers of the bridges between worlds. Chapter 3: Persia and the Middle East, the bridge between worlds. If China wove the silk, and Central Asia carried it, then Persia gave it meaning. It was here, in the lands between the Caspian Sea and the Persian Gulf, that the Silk Road became more than a trade route. It became a bridge of culture, art, and philosophy. For centuries, Persia stood at the heart of everything, the crossroads of empires, the meeting place of East and West. Long before the caravans, Cyrus and Darius had built the Royal Road, a highway so advanced that messages could travel faster than armies. When the Silk Road expanded, it followed the same ancient arteries, and Persia became its pulse. In Persepolis, traders brought silk from China, incense from Arabia, lapis from Afghanistan, and glass from Rome. Gold coins from the Mediterranean bore Greek gods on one side, and Persian fire altars on the other, proof of a world that was beginning to blend. Persian cities like Nishapur, Rai, and Isfahan became sanctuaries for merchants and scholars. Here, languages intertwined. Greek astronomy was translated into Arabic. Indian mathematics met Persian poetry, and from this fusion, a golden age of science was born. The House of Wisdom in Baghdad, though younger than the Silk Road itself, was its spiritual heir, a place where scrolls from every nation gathered under one roof. There, scholars worked in the flicker of lamplight to preserve and expand the knowledge of the world. But Persia's gift to the Silk Road wasn't only intellectual, it was emotional. The Persian love of beauty shaped the way the road looked and felt. Carpet weaving, miniature painting, calligraphy, and perfume. These were not mere luxuries. They were expressions of grace that traveled as far as the camels could carry them. In time, Persia became the soul of the Silk Road, a civilization that believed trade and art, faith and curiosity were all threads of the same divine fabric. And long after empires fell, the Persian influence remained in the tiles of Samarkand, in the words of poets like Rumi, in the perfume of saffron and rose that still drifts along forgotten markets. Persia did not just profit from the Silk Road. It taught the world how to connect with beauty. Chapter 4: India and South Asia, the spiritual artery of the Silk Road. Where Persia connected, India inspired. The subcontinent was not only a marketplace, it was a temple of thought. Its philosophies, faiths, and stories flowed outward like rivers, nourishing minds across Asia. From India came Buddhism, one of the Silk Road's most enduring gifts. Monks traveled north through the passes of the Himalayas, carrying not gold or silk, but scrolls written in Sanskrit and Pali. They crossed the deserts of Dunhuang and the steppes of Central Asia, founding monasteries wherever they stopped to rest. Through their teachings, compassion and mindfulness found their way to China, Korea, and eventually Japan. But the Silk Road gave back as well. From the east, India received silk and porcelain. From the west, horses, gold, and glass. The trade ports of Gujarat, Bharuch, and Tamralipti thrived as gateways to both land and sea routes, where Arabian dhows met Chinese junks under skies filled with monsoon clouds. India's craftsmen added their own brilliance to the web of exchange. They refined dyes, creating indigo and madder that colored fabrics across continents. They perfected metalwork and gem cutting, sending jewelry glittering with rubies and emeralds westward to Persia and Rome. And above all, they traded stories, the lifeblood of imagination. Indian fables like the Panchatantra traveled the Silk Road, finding new homes in Arabic, Persian, and later, European tongues. Through these tales, wisdom crossed borders far more easily than armies ever could. From the bustling streets of Taxila to the sacred riverbanks of the Ganges, India became a place where traders found not just goods, but enlightenment. It gave the Silk Road its spiritual rhythm, the heartbeat of belief, art, and reflection. Every merchant who left its shores carried a part of that rhythm with them. And centuries later, when the world looked back on the Silk Road, they would see that its true wealth was not silk, not spice, not gold, but the quiet wisdom born from India's patient, enduring soul. Chapter 5: The Arabian Peninsula and North Africa, the caravans of faith. If Central Asia was the Silk Road's heart, and Persia its soul, then Arabia was its voice, a steady rhythm of prayer, poetry, and wind-swept wisdom that carried across continents. The deserts of Arabia had always known trade. Long before the Silk Road reached its full form, caravans crossed the sands carrying frankincense, myrrh, and spices, treasures that filled temples in Rome and shrines in India alike. When the Silk Road expanded westward, these routes became its southern arteries, connecting the overland roads to the maritime routes of the Indian Ocean. From ports like Aden, Muscat, and Jeddah, ships carried silk, porcelain, and precious metals up the Red Sea. Then overland to Cairo and Alexandria, where the goods of the East met the markets of the Mediterranean. But Arabia gave more than commerce. It gave belief. In the 7th century, Islam rose from the sands and reshaped the world's geography of spirit and trade alike. Within decades, the Islamic Caliphate stretched from Spain to India, uniting regions that had once been scattered. For the first time, one language, Arabic, and one shared faith connected much of the ancient trading world. Under this unity, the Silk Road flourished anew. Muslim scholars, sailors, and merchants carried ideas as readily as they carried silk. They built caravanserais across the desert, mapped the stars, and perfected the astrolabe, a tool that guided travelers across land and sea long before the compass became common. In Cairo and Baghdad, knowledge gathered like the tides. Arab geographers measured the curvature of the earth. Physicians translated Indian and Greek medicine. Astronomers charted planets that had once been mere myths. And through North Africa, the road took on a new rhythm. The hum of marketplaces beneath the shadows of minarets, the blending of Berber, Arab, and African cultures in cities like Tunis, Tripoli, and Fez. Camels carried not only goods, but also the verses of poets and philosophers, their words echoing through centuries, reminding the world that the Silk Road was as much a road of faith and intellect as it was of trade. Chapter 6: The Mediterranean and Europe, the edge of the Silk Road. At last, the Silk Road reached its western edge, the glittering basin of the Mediterranean Sea, where ships rocked gently in harbors filled with spices, silk, and rumor. Here, in the cities of Antioch, Constantinople, and Venice, the road met the sea, and the world became smaller. In Constantinople, the capital of Byzantium, east met west in marble corridors and golden domes. Traders from China and India sold their wares in markets that stood beneath mosaics of saints and emperors. The Byzantine Empire thrived on this exchange. Silk garments embroidered with Christian imagery were worn by nobles who never guessed their fabric's journey had begun beneath mulberry trees thousands of miles away. To the south, Alexandria remained a jewel of knowledge and trade. Its docks were filled with the scents of pepper, cinnamon, and sandalwood. Its scholars studied manuscripts brought from the deserts of Arabia and the courts of Persia. Then came Venice, a city of water and mirrors, where the Silk Road found its reflection in the west. Venetian merchants became masters of trade, their ships sailing east to Constantinople, their agents traveling through Persia and beyond. They dealt not only in silk, but in stories, bringing back tales of distant lands that fueled Europe's imagination and its eventual voyages of discovery. From the Silk Road, Europe gained more than luxury. It inherited the knowledge of the East, algebra, paper, gunpowder, navigational charts, and the wisdom of centuries gathered from Baghdad, India, and China. These ideas lit the spark that would one day ignite the Renaissance, the rebirth of art and science. The road's physical paths may have ended here, at the edge of the sea, but its legacy traveled onward, across the waves. When European explorers set sail in the 15th century, they were chasing the same dream that had driven every Silk Road traveler, the dream of connection. Even today, that dream endures, in our trade routes, our technologies, and our shared curiosity. The Silk Road never truly ended. It simply changed its form, from camel caravans to cargo ships, from parchment letters to digital signals. And as night falls over the Mediterranean, one can still imagine it, the whisper of sails, the hum of the market, and somewhere in the distance, the faint echo of camel bells fading into the wind, as the ancient highway of dreams carries on, unseen, weaving the world together still. Part 3. The Modern Silk Roads. From empire to globalization. History is rarely a straight line. It bends, fades, disappears, and then suddenly it returns. So it was with the Silk Road. When its caravans vanished beneath the sands, the world did not fall silent. The spirit of connection merely changed its form. From the age of sail to the dawn of steel, humanity built new roads, through water, through empire, through wires and wind. The dream of the Silk Road, of a world bound together by trade and curiosity, never ended. It simply found new horizons. Tonight, we follow that dream into the modern age, through the rise of maritime powers, the empires that reshaped the map, the machines that shrank the world, and the new roads now being built beneath the same sky, where camel bells once rang. The story continues. The ancient highway of dreams has become the network of our time. Chapter 1. From caravans to sails, the age of maritime silk. As the caravans dwindled, a new kind of traveler took their place, sailors. The same wind that once filled the desert now filled sails. By the 15th century, Arab, Indian, and Chinese merchants had mastered the seas. The maritime Silk Road stretched across the Indian Ocean, linking Guangzhou, Calicut, Muscat, Zanzibar, and Venice. Instead of camels, there were fleets. Instead of sandstorms, monsoons. At the heart of this transformation stood China's Ming dynasty. The emperor's great admiral, Zheng He, commanded treasure ships that dwarfed anything Europe had yet imagined. His voyages carried porcelain, silk, jade, and knowledge, gifts of peace and prestige to kingdoms from East Africa to Arabia. He did not conquer, he connected. Meanwhile, in the West, curiosity became conquest. The same maps drawn from Silk Road tales guided Portuguese and Spanish explorers to chart new sea routes to the east. The age of exploration was, in truth, the Silk Road reborn, this time upon the waves. But the seas carried shadows too. Where merchants once traded under stars, now empires sailed under flags. The old spirit of exchange began to mix with ambition. The world was about to grow rich and restless. Chapter 2. The Empires of Trade, Silk, and Steel. The 17th and 18th centuries brought an era of empires, European powers, carving the globe into roots and colonies. And yet, beneath the cannons and commerce, the ghost of the Silk Road lingered. The British, Dutch, French, and Portuguese all sought the same prize, control of the ancient flow of goods between East and West, tea from China, spices from the Indies, cotton from India, all once carried along the Silk Road, now filled the holds of merchant fleets. In India, the British East India Company turned trade into an empire, controlling ports that had once been open crossroads. In Central Asia, Russian expansion followed the bones of the old Silk Road, connecting the steppes to Moscow by rail and ambition. In Persia and the Middle East, caravans gave way to railways, and the telegraph replaced the messenger. The Silk Road was becoming industrial, made of iron, not sand. Even the Ottoman Empire, standing at the crossroads of Europe and Asia, found itself both gatekeeper and prisoner of geography. Through Constantinople still passed the goods of the East, but now they were taxed, measured, and owned by the empire. And yet, connection endured. A Persian artisan might still weave silk for a Russian trader. A British sailor might still wear a Chinese coat dyed in Indian indigo. Even under the empire, the road's invisible threads held. But soon, another revolution would come, one that would change the rhythm of the world forever, the revolution of machines. Chapter 3. The Industrial Silk Roads, Steam, Steel, and Smoke. The 19th century transformed the Silk Road once again. not through conquest or faith this time, but through machines. The age of steam changed everything. Ships grew faster, railways stretched across continents, and for the first time in history, time itself became a commodity. A journey that once took months by camel could now be crossed in days by train. The Trans-Siberian Railway, opened in the early 1900s, followed the bones of the old Northern Silk Road, binding Moscow to Vladivostok, and with it, Europe to Asia. In Persia, engineers mapped out steel tracks where caravans once trudged. In India, the British laid railways that stitched the subcontinent together, not unlike the way ancient traders had once connected its ports and plains. Industrialization changed the very purpose of the road. No longer did merchants travel to exchange a few bolts of silk or sacks of spice. Now it was coal, cotton, and machinery that moved, measured by ton and profit, not story and song. The human pace of the Silk Road slowed, replaced by the mechanical heartbeat of pistons and gears. The smell of spice gave way to the smoke of progress. But beneath it all, the old desire remained, to connect, to share, to move faster toward one another. In a way, the industrial age did not erase the Silk Road. It accelerated it. The same urge that once drove a merchant across the Pamirs now pushed an engineer to span oceans with iron. And even though the world seemed smaller, the wonder of connection remained just as vast. Chapter 4: The Cold War Divide, Shadows over the Desert. The 20th century brought both brilliance and fracture. The world had grown closer than ever, but also more divided. After 2 world wars, new borders carved the old road into fragments. The Iron Curtain split Eurasia in two. The ancient trade cities, Samarkand, Tashkent, Kashgar, found themselves isolated behind ideologies. The Silk Road that once united continents now lay divided by distrust. For decades, caravans gave way to checkpoints, and scholars who once traded ideas now lived under suspicion. The spirit of exchange, fragile but immortal, hid in the margins. Yet even then, it never fully vanished. Within the Soviet Union, rail lines still ran across the steppes. In China, state routes followed the paths of the Han emperors. In the Middle East, markets in Tehran, Istanbul, and Aleppo still thrummed with life, their merchants speaking the same ancient languages of trade and trust. While politics built walls, culture found cracks to pass through. Jazz records crossed borders hidden in suitcases. Books, art, and stories found secret ways to travel. Even in the silence of the Cold War, the Silk Road whispered, reminding us that connection, once born, cannot be undone. When the Soviet Union fell and China reopened its western gates, the world exhaled. The Silk Road, buried under half a century of frost, began to stir once more. Chapter 5: The New Silk Road and the Digital Age. Today, the Silk Road lives again, not in sand or stone, but in fiber optics, shipping routes, and airways that circle the earth. The dream that began 2,000 years ago has become the blueprint of globalization. From Beijing to Berlin, from Shanghai to Rotterdam, the threads of trade now glow as light beneath the ocean. Every email, every shipment, every satellite transmission follows paths that echo the caravans of old. China's Belt and Road Initiative, announced in the 21st century, is the modern heir to this ancient vision. Highways, railways, and ports once again connect Asia, Africa, and Europe. A network of commerce and culture, echoing the pulse of the Silk Road reborn. But the road is no longer just physical. The digital Silk Road hums invisibly beneath our feet. Data replaces silk. Ideas travel faster than wind. A message sent from one side of the planet reaches the other in less time than it once took a merchant to adjust his saddle. Still, at its core, the meaning remains unchanged. The Silk Road was never truly about trade. It was about connection. It was the story of how strangers became neighbors, and neighbors became friends. Look closely, and you'll see its reflection everywhere. In an online marketplace linking continents, in an airport echoing with dozens of tongues, in a student studying halfway across the world. The Silk Road was humanity's first great experiment in unity. And in our modern age, with all its speed, chaos, and light, we are still living inside that experiment. The road never ended. It became us. So as the world sleeps and the night draws its quiet curtain once again, listen closely. Beneath the hum of servers and the rhythm of cities, you might still hear it. That ancient sound of footsteps on sand, the soft bells of a caravan, the whisper of the highway of dreams, still traveling, not through the desert, but through the heart of every connection we make. If you are sleeping already, sleep well. If you are listening, may the rest of your night be easy. Subscribe to History for Sleep, and let the next story find you.